had planned the trip for weeks. I wanted to go off the grid for a while, no phone, no internet, no one around. Just the woods, the stars, and the sound of the wind through the trees. I picked a quiet patch of forest up north, several hours from the nearest town. It wasn't a marked campsite, just a spot I'd found through some satellite images and topographic maps. It looked peaceful. I packed everything I'd need: food, a tent, extra layers, bear spray, knife, first aid, solar charger. I double-checked everything twice. I wanted to be prepared. The drive out was long but calming. The last hour or so was down a narrow, rocky forest road that looked like it hadn't seen a vehicle in years. Branches scraped the sides of my truck, and I had to ease over a few shallow streams and muddy patches. By the time I got to the spot, the sun was dipping low. I hiked in a short way and found a flat, quiet area near a small stream. The air was crisp, clean. I set up camp, got a fire going, and ate a simple meal before crawling into my tent. The first night was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of silence that feels thick. No planes overhead, no far-off hum of highways, just the occasional rustle of leaves or crack of a branch somewhere deep in the woods. But nothing alarming. I slept better than I had in weeks. The next couple days went by without anything unusual. I spent time gathering firewood, hiking small trails, and just sitting by the stream. The quiet started to feel good. I adjusted to the rhythm of the woods. I kept my food hung up and followed all the typical camping precautions. I saw a few deer, a fox, lots of birds. Nothing big, no people. On the fourth night, things shifted. It started with the sound of movement just outside my tent. I had gone to bed early, around 9 p.m., after a long day of walking. It was cold out, the kind of cold that settles into your bones if you're not layered up. I was half asleep when I heard the noise, something brushing softly against the side of my tent. First, I thought it was wind. Then I realized the air was still, dead still, no breeze. The noise was slow, deliberate, a soft rustle followed by a faint thud, then silence. I lay completely still, listening. My heart picked up. I reached slowly for the knife I kept next to my sleeping bag. I didn't move beyond that. I waited. Whatever it was, it didn't try to get in. After about 10 minutes, the sounds faded away. I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, I checked around the tent. I saw faint depressions in the soft earth, but nothing clear enough to say what made them. Could have been an animal, maybe even a curious deer. I didn't see any claw marks or torn fabric. Still, I kept my knife close the next night. The fifth day, it felt like something was watching me. It's hard to explain. I'd look up from boiling water or tying my boots and just feel it. Eyes on me. The hairs on my neck would stand up, even though I saw and heard nothing. The forest was still, too still. The birds weren't singing as much. The little animals I'd seen scurrying about before were gone. That night, I barely slept. The same brushing sound came back, but it was heavier this time. It didn't stay long. Just a few soft footsteps, then silence. I kept the fire going longer that night and laid awake with my hand on the knife for hours. The sixth morning, I decided I would leave. Something wasn't right. I started packing things up, but I felt watched the entire time. I kept glancing over my shoulder. Every little sound made me pause. Then I found the scratch. It was on a tree near my camp, one I passed every day to get water from the stream. 3 long gouges in the bark, fresh, too high up for any small animal, too clean and deep to be weather damage. I hadn't seen it the day before. I didn't know what made it, but I knew it wasn't something I wanted to stay around to find out. I finished packing quickly and started hiking back to the truck. I kept my knife in hand the entire time. The woods were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. Felt tense, like the forest was holding its breath. Halfway to the truck, I heard something behind me, a sharp crack, like a branch snapping under weight. I stopped and listened. Another crack, closer. I turned but saw nothing. I started moving faster, heart pounding. I wasn't running, but I was close. I heard it again, this time off to the side. Then silence. I didn't stop again until I reached the truck. When I finally got in and started the engine, I let myself breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. I drove back down that terrible road, scraping branches and bouncing over rocks, not caring. I just wanted out. I didn't relax until I hit pavement again. I drove until I reached a small gas station, went inside, and just stood there for a while, surrounded by people, lights, noise. Felt surreal. I never figured out what it was. Maybe a mountain lion, maybe something else. Something big, quiet, and curious. I'll never know. I haven't gone back to that area since. I still camp, but now I stick to places with more people around. More noise. I double-check my surroundings constantly. That feeling, that thick silence, the sense of being watched. It stays with you. It gets under your skin. That trip reminded me how small I am out there. How fast the forest can turn from peaceful to predatory. Whatever was out there didn't want me gone bad enough to attack. But it didn't want me staying either. And I listened. It was a late autumn weekend, the kind that's perfect for camping if you're prepared for the cold. The trees were almost bare, only a few straggling leaves clinging to branches like leftover bits of color, and the forest floor was a blanket of damp earth, fallen twigs, and rotting leaves. My buddy and I had decided to head out for a weekend at a remote site, one of those spots that requires you to drive along winding gravel roads before you even think about setting up camp. It wasn't a popular place by any means. Most people stuck to the easier-to-reach campgrounds closer to town, but that's exactly why we liked it. No crowds, no noise, just peace. We'd done a lot of hiking in the area before, but this time we wanted to camp by one of the deeper, lesser-known lakes. We'd been there once on a quick trip, but this time we decided to stay overnight and really soak in the experience. The drive up wasn't bad. Distant city lights giving way to rural stretches of highway, then forest roads with barely any traffic. By the time we arrived, the sun was setting, and the air was cool enough to make us zip up our jackets and dig around for the first of many layers of clothing. The lake was smaller than I'd remembered, but it had a quiet beauty to it. We set up the tent a little ways back from the shore, near a cluster of pines. The ground was firm and rocky, but not too bad. There was a light drizzle in the air, and everything had that sharp smell of wet wood, leaves, and earth. We'd pitched the tent just as it got dark and made a small fire to warm up some canned soup. There was no one else around, and the night felt oddly still. The rain picked up a little while later, but we weren't bothered by it. Inside the tent, we were warm, dry, and settled in. It's strange how quickly you can get used to the sound of rain when it's falling steadily outside. It becomes a kind of white noise, comforting, rhythmic. My buddy and I dozed off after a while, the soft patter on the tent above lulling us into a light sleep. Then, in the middle of the night, there was a noise that pulled me out of my sleep. It wasn't thunder or the wind, or anything that could be easily explained by the storm outside. It was more like a series of deep thuds, heavy and deliberate, as if something was moving slowly through the underbrush nearby. At first, I tried to dismiss it. The wind can make strange noises, after all, and the forest is full of creatures. Deer, raccoons, bears, all capable of making strange sounds in the dead of night. But these thuds were different. They didn't come in the usual patterns I'd expect from a forest animal. These were slow, spaced out, and as the thuds grew closer, I felt my stomach tighten, instinct kicking in. I lay still, staring up at the ceiling of the tent, trying to listen. The thuds didn't stop. If anything, they got a little louder. Whatever it was moving closer, closer to us. I heard it then, a low scraping sound, like something metal dragging along the ground. My mind raced. Was it a bear? No, the scraping didn't sound like claws on rocks. It didn't sound like anything I knew. I tried to peek out of the corner of the tent, but the rain was falling too hard to see anything through the fabric. Another series of thuds. The scraping sound came again, and then, finally, a noise I could recognize. Faint, rhythmic creaking. It sounded like tent poles? No, that couldn't be right. I swallowed hard. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't just an animal, at least not any animal I could identify. It was something bigger, something deliberate. Slowly, I shifted my weight, trying not to make a sound. My friend, who had been asleep, was stirring beside me. likely picking up on the same strange vibe that had me so tense. For what felt like hours, nothing happened. The noises stopped, and the night seemed to settle back into the rhythm of the rain. I finally let out a breath, but I couldn't relax. My mind kept racing through scenarios, trying to make sense of what I just heard. I kept imagining an animal dragging something behind it, some kind of trap, or maybe a carcass, but it didn't sit right. The scraping, the slow, deliberate movement, it felt almost unnatural. Then I heard it again, closer this time. The scraping, the thuds. But this time they were followed by a muffled clang, like metal striking metal. And then, something that made my blood run cold. A low, slow growl, almost mechanical, like it wasn't coming from a living creature at all. I stiffened. My heart started hammering in my chest. That wasn't a growl. That wasn't any animal sound I knew. It was like the noise came from a refrigerator, a broken fridge, or something similar, sitting on top of tent poles. That's the best way I can describe it. A refrigerator, but somehow higher up, sitting on something that made it unstable, something that made it sway and creak as if it was teetering on the edge of falling. And then it clicked. The horns. There was something in my mind about horns, about the sound of them clashing, something strange. The growl, that scraping, something made it seem less like an animal and more like a twisted, sickening mockery of something alive. My mind flashed to a strange image. A massive fridge on tent poles, topped with a rack of horns. Unreal, almost comical, but horrifying in the context of that moment. And then the chilling thought that this thing, whatever it was, wasn't intelligent. It had the intelligence of a walnut. It wasn't trying to hunt us or stalk us. It was just mindlessly doing whatever it was doing, with no care for what was around it. The rain had picked up again, and I could barely hear the thuds over the sound of it. But I knew it was close, closer than before. I felt something in the air, the weight of it. It wasn't just a bear. It wasn't just a storm. This was something that didn't belong. Something that had no purpose but to exist in the moment, whatever that meant. Finally, after what seemed like hours of holding my breath, the noises stopped. The air didn't feel right anymore. It was as if everything had suddenly gone still, like the world was holding its breath, too. I didn't know how long I lay there, wide-eyed, but eventually, I had to move. I couldn't just stay there, paralyzed. I got up, very slowly, and unzipped the tent. I had to see what was outside. The moment I opened the flap, I regretted it. There, just outside the tent, was the shape. The fridge on tent poles, or something like it. It was hard to make out details in the rain, but I could see the silhouette clearly. It was perched atop something, a structure, and it was surrounded by what appeared to be antlers and horns, all twisted and misshapen. The metal fridge-like object had odd dents and scrapes in it, like it had been dragged over rough terrain. I couldn't explain it, but in that moment, I knew one thing. Whatever this was, it wasn't supposed to be here. And whatever it wasn't friendly. My instinct told me that it was dangerous, not because it was actively hunting, but because it was wild in a way that was unpredictable. I didn't wait around to figure it out. I zipped the tent back up and whispered to my friend, urging him to get ready. We didn't say much, but we both knew it was time to go. We packed up quickly, our hands shaking. As we gathered our gear, I kept glancing over at the strange, twisted shape outside, half convinced it was going to come closer. But it didn't. It just stayed there, silent, unmoving, a dark figure in the rain-soaked night. By the time we were ready to leave, it was just gone. We hiked out in a hurry, not saying a word. I kept looking back, half expecting to see something following us. But it never came. When we got back to the truck, we didn't speak for a long time. We both knew what we'd heard. We both knew that whatever had been outside the tent wasn't an animal, at least not in the way we understood it. It was something else, something that shouldn't have been in the woods. I don't know what it was. I don't know if I'll ever understand it. But I know this, whatever it was out there, and it was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It was one of those trips where you don't expect much to happen. My friend and I had decided to camp for the weekend at a campground just outside Portland, near one of those spots that's close enough to the city for a quick escape, but still far enough to feel like you're surrounded by nature. The campground was well-traveled, with RVs scattered between the trees, their owners sitting around fires or lounging in folding chairs. It wasn't one of those backcountry campsites that required hours of hiking to get to. No, this was a pretty urban campground, accessible, and it had a lot of people, especially on a rainy weekend like this one. We'd arrived in the late afternoon, and after setting up the tent, we spent some time walking around, exploring the area. The rain had just started, light at first, but it picked up as the evening wore on. By the time night had fallen, we were inside my tent, bundled up in our sleeping bags, listening to the sound of raindrops hitting the canvas. The air was cool, and the smell of wet earth filled the space. My friend was on one side of the tent, me on the other. We were both dozing off, not fully asleep, but drifting in and out of it. The sound came suddenly, breaking through the soft rain. It was loud, really loud. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd heard before, not anything I could immediately place. The scream was deep and guttural, almost like something from a horror movie, but it was real, and it was close, too close, the kind of noise that cuts right through you, making your muscles tense and your heart race without even knowing why. I froze. My friend's body stiffened beside me. We didn't speak for a moment, both of us trying to process the sound, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't a coyote. It didn't have the usual yip or howl. It wasn't a raccoon or a fox. I know animal sounds. I've studied them. I'm an ecologist, and I've spent enough time camping and hiking to have heard every typical noise an animal might make in the wild. But this was something else. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck rise. The scream didn't sound like it came from an animal I was familiar with. It was massive, deeper than I would expect from most creatures around here, especially in a campground. My mind raced, running through all the possibilities. The only thing I could think of that might match the size and the sound was a cougar, but that didn't make sense. Cougars don't come this close to populated areas, especially not in a campground like this. They tend to avoid humans. And besides, this sound was different from what I expected from a cougar. It wasn't right. I glanced at my friend. His face was pale in the dim light of the tent, his eyes wide. He hadn't said anything, but I could see the confusion and fear in his expression. I think he was feeling the same thing I was, a deep, primal unease that I couldn't shake off. There was no explanation for it. No animal made a sound like that. I stayed quiet for a few moments, listening, trying to hear if anything else would follow. But there was nothing, just the rain. The campground was eerily silent for what felt like a long time. And then, just as I thought the noise had been some sort of mistake, another scream broke through the silence. But this one came from across the lake. It was faint, distant, but it was unmistakable. The same screech, the same deep, eerie cry, but this time it echoed off the water, sending a chill down my spine. It wasn't the rain. It wasn't the wind. This was real. My friend and I both stayed silent, our breaths shallow as we lay there, not moving, waiting. The rain picked up again, a soft drumming on the tent, but the tension in the air was thick. Felt like something was out there, something big, something that wasn't supposed to be this close to the campground. Neither of us said anything, but I could feel the unease between us, like we were both aware that something was wrong, but neither of us wanted to acknowledge it out loud. Eventually, the sounds stopped. The night stretched on in stillness, and we both drifted into an uneasy sleep, but neither of us felt comfortable enough to truly relax. It was a restless night, filled with half-formed dreams and the occasional shuffling in the woods outside. The sounds of the storm and the occasional rustle in the leaves kept us alert, but nothing else screamed or roared like that first sound. The next morning, the rain had lightened to a drizzle, and the sky was gray, overcast but not stormy. We got up, packed away the tent, and wandered through the campground, stretching our legs after a long, sleepless night. Most of the other campers were slowly waking up too, tending to their own gear, cooking breakfast over campfires, or sitting in their RVs. It looked like any other morning at a campground, but there was something different in the air, something that didn't sit right. As we passed by a few of the RVs, I noticed the dogs. Most of them were cowering beneath the vehicles, their tails tucked between their legs, eyes wide with fear. I've been around dogs long enough to know when they're uneasy, but I had never seen so many in one place looking so terrified. Some were tied outside to picnic tables or trees, their owners unaware, while others were inside, peeking through the windows, looking anxious and unsettled. It wasn't normal. Something had spooked them, something that had made them feel vulnerable and scared. I glanced over at my friend. His eyes were still wide, and he must have seen what I was seeing because he gave a small nod. We didn't need to say anything. We both knew the scream had been real, and we both knew that whatever had caused it was still out there, lurking in the shadows of the trees, just beyond the campsites. As the morning wore on and we broke down our campsite, I tried to push the feeling of unease from my mind, but it stuck with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had been too close to something. It was just a hunch, but I couldn't ignore it. I've spent enough time in nature to recognize when something is out of place, when the natural order of things is disturbed. And last night, that scream, followed by the terrified dogs, it felt like nature was telling us something wasn't right. When we left the campground and drove back to Portland, I kept looking out the window, expecting to see something moving in the trees or crossing the road in front of us. My thoughts kept returning to that scream, to the dogs, to the feeling that something had been watching us. To this day, I can't say for sure what it was. I've thought about it a lot, and while I maintain it was either a massive cougar or something like Bigfoot, there's still part of me that wonders if I'll ever know the truth. The cougar makes the most sense, but there's something about that scream that didn't fit any known animal. Something about it felt wrong. Whatever it was, I'll never forget that night. The way the air felt heavy with tension, the way the dogs reacted, the way we just sat there in the dark, listening to the sound echo across the lake. It wasn't an experience I ever expected, especially not at a campground so close to Portland. I can't shake the feeling that whatever it wasn't supposed to be there. And the more I think about it, the more I'm convinced we weren't just hearing an animal. We were hearing something that had no business being that close to people. Something that belonged in the wild, not in a campground full of RVs and campfires. But in the end, I'll never know for sure. All I know is this: we weren't alone out there. Something was watching us. Something that still lingers in my memory. I planned the trip a few weeks in advance. It was just meant to be a quick escape from the city. Nothing ambitious, just a weekend at a semi-rural campground not far outside Portland. The place had plenty of amenities, a well-worn loop of sites, and enough RVs packed in to make it feel more like a parking lot with fire rings than a remote stretch of forest. But that was the appeal. No worries about dangerous wildlife, no logistical stress. Just a tent, the woods, and the constant sound of drizzle against nylon. I went with a friend. We both liked the outdoors, and though it wasn't exactly backcountry stuff, we were happy to just be away from phone screens and office lights. We drove in late Friday afternoon. The rain had started earlier that day and hadn't let up. The parking area was soft with mud, and most of the RV folks had already hunkered down. A few other tent campers were setting up, heads down, rushing to get their rainflies on before the sky dumped any more. We were in site number 43, if I remember right, a patch of dirt and gravel under a few broadleaf trees, just far enough from the lake to see a sliver of it through the trunks. By dusk, the temperature had dropped. We cooked a quick meal on my little stove under the tarp and huddled into the tent as soon as we were done. There wasn't much else to do. The rain had a steady rhythm, tapping on the roof of the tent. It wasn't the kind of heavy storm that made you anxious, just a constant mist with moments of heavier bursts. Inside the tent, it was dry and warm, and we dozed off early, the kind of sleep you slip into after a long day outdoors. It was probably close to midnight when I woke up. Not all the way awake, just drifting in that haze between sleep and consciousness. Something had pulled me up, maybe just the sound of the rain, or maybe something else. I laid there listening. My friend was breathing slow beside me. Everything was quiet except for the rain and the occasional drip from a branch above. And then I heard it, a scream. Not a human scream, not a child or someone yelling. It was an animal, a loud, long, piercing scream that seemed to tear right through the rain. It came from the trees maybe 30 or 40 feet away, just past the edge of our sight. My whole body tensed. I've spent my life around wildlife, and I know the sounds they make. Coyotes, raccoons, owls, deer. None of them sound like this. This was deep, guttural at first, then it pitched into something higher, something that almost sounded like pain or anger or warning. I didn't move. My eyes were wide open in the dark, and my breathing was slow and shallow. I tried to run through possibilities in my head. My first thought, weirdly enough, was maybe a cougar, but even that didn't sit right. I've heard cougars scream before. They have this eerie, drawn-out shriek that's often compared to a woman screaming. But this wasn't quite that. It was too rough, too powerful. It had weight behind it. My friend stirred. I didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Just silence now. Even the rain seemed quieter. A few minutes passed. Then it came again. But this time it was distant, farther off, across the lake. It was the same kind of scream, maybe a little less intense, maybe muffled by the distance and trees, but it was unmistakably the same creature. My mind was racing. Two of them, one close by, the other calling back. That didn't sit right with me. Predators like cougars don't usually advertise themselves that way. Not repeatedly, not that loud, and certainly not in the middle of a busy campground. I lay still. My friend hadn't moved again. Maybe they were still half asleep, maybe pretending not to hear it. I didn't know what to do except wait. The rest of the night passed with no more screams. No heavy footsteps, no twigs snapping. Just the endless drizzle and the occasional patter of water sliding off the trees onto the ground. When morning came, we unzipped the tent and stepped out into cold fog. Everything was damp. The ground was soft and slick. Our tarp sagged from the weight of pooled water. But what stood out the most was the silence. Campgrounds are never truly quiet in the morning. Someone's always got a dog barking, a kid yelling, a camp stove firing up, but this was dead still. The birds weren't even singing yet. I walked up to the edge of the site and looked around. RVs were there, like always, but the dogs, every single one I saw, were acting strange. Hiding, trembling. A golden retriever tied to a post under an awning was curled under the RV, shaking. Another little terrier-type dog had wrapped itself around the leg of a picnic table, eyes wide, ears flat. I saw 3 or 4 more in similar states. Not one barked, not one made a sound. That's when it hit me. Whatever had made that sound in the night, it hadn't just unsettled me. Every animal here had heard it too, and they were still afraid. Animals react to predators in ways humans don't. They know when something's wrong, and their instincts aren't clouded by logic or rationalizing. We didn't talk much as we packed up. I moved slowly, scanning the woods constantly. I kept thinking I'd see something, movement between the trees, a shadow near the lake, but there was nothing. The only marks on the ground were boot prints and tire tracks. No broken branches, no tracks, nothing to hint at what had passed through. We left that morning, drove straight back into the city. I spent the next few days trying to explain it to myself. I listened to every recorded animal call I could find. Bobcats, owls, foxes, bears. I even went back and listened to distorted human screams and sound effects. Nothing matched. The closest I got was a cougar's screech, but it still didn't explain the second scream. It didn't explain the dogs. Weeks passed. I didn't report it. I didn't tell anyone besides a couple of people I trusted. I figured no one would believe me anyway, and what was I going to report? A weird noise in the woods? Campgrounds get all kinds of visitors. It wasn't illegal to make noise, but something about it stayed with me. Every time I've gone camping since, I've paid more attention to the animals. If they're quiet, if they're hiding, I take notice. Dogs especially, they don't fake fear, and they don't all hide from a raccoon or an owl hooting in the night. I've still never figured out what made those screams. I never heard them again, but I remember the way they sounded, not just the tone of them, but the force. It felt like they came from something big, something that wasn't afraid of being heard, something that wanted to be heard. Could it have been a massive cougar? Maybe, but I've worked in and around ecosystems long enough to know that cougars don't hang around crowded campsites. don't make their presence known so boldly, and don't have packmates calling back from across a lake. Everything about it was off. I don't believe in Bigfoot. I've never seen anything to make me take that seriously. But I know what I heard wasn't normal. It wasn't an animal I could place. And I've placed hundreds. It's not a story I tell often. Not because I'm afraid of being judged, but because there's nothing to add. It happened. It scared me more than I care to admit. And the only evidence I have are the memories, the rain, and the dogs that wouldn't come out from under the RVs. I still go camping, still love the woods, but I pick my sites differently now. I pay attention to the margins, the tree lean, the fog, the water line after dark. And I listen, because sometimes, when the rain is soft and the night is quiet, something you don't expect might scream from just beyond your light. And you'll know, deep in your bones, that it's not supposed to be there. I needed a break. That's all it started as. I'd been working back-to-back shifts, spending more time under artificial lights than actual sunlight, and I could feel it getting to me. The kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. I knew I had to get out of town for a bit, just detach from the noise and everything else. I'd been up in the northern part of the state once before, a few years back, and remembered there was this lake. Remote, clean, way off the beaten path. No cell signal, barely any trail markers. That's what I wanted. Not one of those manicured camping grounds with other tents 30 feet away. I wanted real quiet. I packed light but made sure I had all the essentials. Tent, sleeping bag, basic cookware, a portable stove, water filtration kit, a couple of knives, a small hatchet, plenty of food, and a good flashlight with extra batteries. I had my map too, an old paper one just in case GPS dropped out. I drove up on a Friday morning, early, hoping to beat whatever weekend crowd might be heading out the same way. But as I suspected, the deeper I drove into the woods, the less I saw of other people. At some point, the gravel road narrowed, and the trees crowded in on both sides. No more signs, no more guideposts, just the forest and the crunch of tires on rock. I parked where the road ended, more or less. There was a wide dirt patch, looked like it had been used a few times as an unofficial lot. I left a note on the dash, just a date and my name, and tucked it by the windshield in case someone came across the car. From there, it was all footwork. I strapped on my pack and followed a narrow game trail that eventually hooked left through a slope of tall pines. The light started to shift the deeper I went. It got cooler, quieter. No traffic hum, no voices, just the occasional bird, wind through the branches, and that soft padding sound my boots made on the dirt. I reached the lake in the early afternoon. It was exactly as I remembered. Still water, tree-lined shore, and not a single sign of other people. No beer cans, no fire pits, no trails of garbage like you see in the more popular spots. It felt untouched. I walked around the bend where the trees opened up to a sort of small clearing, flat and covered in pine needles. That's where I set up camp. Tent went up fast, and I boiled some water for coffee. Just sat there for a while and stared at the water. It was perfect. I felt calm, and I hadn't felt calm in months. The first night was normal. A little chilly, but I'd expected that. The sleeping bag held up fine, and aside from the usual animal sounds, raccoons, maybe a fox somewhere in the distance, I slept straight through. I woke early, stretched out my legs, and made breakfast. There was a kind of clarity that morning that only comes when you've been completely removed from civilization. No phone buzzes, no emails, no small talk. Just stillness. I spent the day walking the perimeter of the lake, marking my location with little notches on trees in case I got turned around. Around midday, I found what looked like old boot prints near the far edge of the water. Hard to tell how recent, but they were there. The ground was damp and soft, and the prints were deep. Not animal, definitely human. At first, I thought nothing of it. Could have been weeks old. Maybe someone else had camped out here before me. I didn't give it much thought and headed back. That second night, I stayed up a little later, made a small fire, and sat by it as the sun went down. I had the flashlight out too, using it sparingly to save batteries. Around 11, I heard something off in the woods. It wasn't the usual forest sound. This was heavier. Something big moving slowly. I froze and listened. It stopped. Then again, soft, deliberate steps on dry leaves. I reached for the flashlight and flicked it on, pointing it toward the trees. Nothing. The sound stopped. I figured it might have been a deer. Big animal, sure, but harmless. Still, something felt off. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I started to drift, I'd hear something again. Movement, snapping twigs, then silence. At one point, I got out of the tent and stood still in the cold, just staring into the darkness with the flashlight in my hand, waiting. But nothing showed, just my breath and the sound of wind through the trees. The next morning, I checked around the campsite. There were no obvious signs of animals. No disturbed food, no torn fabric, nothing shredded or clawed. But I did find something strange. Right by the edge of the water, about 30 feet from the tent, there was a set of boot prints again. Fresh ones. They hadn't been there the day before. The tread was different from mine. Deeper, wider. I stood over them for a long time, just trying to make sense of it. Whoever made them had come up from the woods behind my tent and walked down toward the lake. Then turned around and went back the same way. It hit me then, whoever it was had come near my tent while I was sleeping. And they hadn't made a sound. No fire, no visible camp. Nothing. Just footsteps in and out. That day, I stayed close to the camp. I didn't go exploring, didn't wander the lake again. I kept the fire going most of the afternoon and tried to act like nothing was wrong. But I packed a few things, just the essentials, in a smaller day pack and kept it by the tent flap. Just in case. That night was worse. Around 1 in the morning, I woke to the sound of breathing. Not mine. Heavy, slow breathing right outside the tent. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I just laid there, frozen. The breathing stopped, and then I heard the softest scrape, like a hand brushing fabric. Then steps, slow, careful steps around the edge of the tent. I waited until morning. I didn't dare unzip the flap. I didn't sleep again, not a second. As soon as the sky started to turn gray, I grabbed the day pack, pulled on my boots, and got out. The main pack stayed behind. I just wanted to get out. Fast. I didn't even stop to take the tent down. I left it standing. I made my way back toward the trail I came in on. But after about a mile, I realized I didn't recognize anything. The trees all looked the same, and I wasn't seeing the notches I'd left. I doubled back, but the forest twisted around me. I knew I was off course. I tried to keep calm, focused on the sun, and moved in what I thought was the right direction. Hours passed. No sign of the trailhead. I was running low on water. My legs ached, and then I heard it again, footsteps. Behind me, keeping pace. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they moved. Always just out of sight. I turned and saw nothing, every time. I started moving faster. I broke into a run, stumbling over roots and rocks. I didn't care about direction anymore. I just wanted distance. I finally found a dry creek bed and followed it downhill. It cut through a denser part of the forest, but I kept going. I figured water would lead me somewhere. Eventually it did. Late in the afternoon, I came across a gravel service road. Not the one I came in on, but it was something. I followed it for hours, until the trees opened and I saw the edge of a field. There was a fence, and beyond it, a small farmhouse. I walked straight to it and banged on the side of the barn until someone came out. The guy didn't ask questions. He just took one look at me, pale, shaking, dirty, and handed me a bottle of water. I asked him what direction the lake was from here, and he said it was at least 12 miles northeast. I'd gone way off course. I didn't go back for the tent or the gear. He drove me into town and I called someone to pick me up. That was 3 weeks ago. I've thought about it every day since. I don't know who was out there or what they wanted, but I know what I heard. I know what I saw, and I know for certain someone came into my camp at night and walked around my tent, just watching. No campfire, no car, no evidence of anyone else for miles. Just those steps. Just that breathing. I still don't sleep right. I've tried to tell myself it was just some hiker, maybe a hunter. But there's no reason for someone to sneak into another person's camp in the middle of the night and leave no trace. No reason to follow someone silently through the woods for hours. I haven't been back since. I don't think I ever will. I spent most of my 20s trying to experience places that weren't home. Work, backpacking, even temporary assignments, they all served the same purpose: distance. Ireland had always fascinated me. The weather, the landscape, the people. It was the perfect blend of raw nature and history. So when I had the chance to take a leave of absence from work, I planned a solo driving trip across the Irish countryside. Just me, a rented car, a few supplies, and a rough map of rural backroads that promised to be scenic and quiet. That was the idea. The day I left Galway, the forecast wasn't ideal. Light rain, some fog, a chance of heavier showers by evening. It was early summer, so I figured I'd have enough daylight to reach a small coastal town I'd picked out for the night. I had a place reserved, an old converted fishing cottage, and a pub nearby where I could get something warm to eat. I wasn't worried. The rain came sooner than expected, and it came hard. Within an hour of setting out, the windshield wipers were going full speed, and even then, they struggled to keep up. I was alone on a narrow stretch of road that twisted between hills and stone fences. I hadn't passed another car in miles. No lights, no signs, no landmarks I recognized. I was still calm, but I was starting to think about contingency plans. When the road forked and the signpost had been so worn by time and weather that the names were unreadable, I made a call. I took the road that sloped downward, figuring it would lead toward the coast. That was my first real mistake. Visibility kept getting worse. Fog rolled in over the rain. The sky had turned a flat gray, and the fields on either side were covered in a low mist that looked like it was creeping across the grass. I slowed the car down to a crawl. My headlights were on, but they didn't cut far into the fog. Everything felt muffled: sound, color, the whole atmosphere. Then, as I rounded a bend, the engine stuttered. Just once. A little hiccup. Then the dash lights flickered, and the engine died. Completely. No warning lights, no sputtering, just silence. The headlights faded out too. I sat there, stunned, trying to turn the key. Nothing. No cranking, no clicking. I tried again. Still nothing. The car was dead. I waited, hoping it would be a fluke. Maybe I'd flooded the engine. After 5 minutes, I gave up. I was in the middle of nowhere, rain slamming the windshield, and my car was dead. I had a signal on my phone, but it was faint. I tried to call for assistance, but it dropped after the first ring. I stepped outside and was instantly soaked to the skin. The rain wasn't just falling, it was hammering. It was cold, and the wind had picked up. I grabbed my backpack, locked the car out of habit, and started walking. It was one of those situations where you quickly go from discomfort to survival mode. My clothes were clinging to me. My boots were heavy and waterlogged. I kept walking, hoping to see a house or a sign or anything that meant I wasn't stranded. But the road just kept winding through more hills and mist. I tried to stay positive. I figured I'd walk for a mile or two and hit a village. There had to be something. After about an hour, I heard something behind me. A faint sound. I stopped and turned around. Through the haze, a pair of dim headlights were slowly cutting through the fog. A vehicle was coming up the road behind me. Relief hit me hard. I stepped to the side and waved, ready to flag them down. As it came closer, I could see it was an old sedan, a model I couldn't place. It was moving slow, like it was being careful in the rain. I waited until it was close. Then I opened the rear door and climbed in, thinking I'd explain everything once I got out of the rain. As soon as I sat down, something felt off. There was no sound in the car. No engine noise, no hum, no vibration, just the sound of rain hitting the roof. I looked up and realized the driver's seat was empty. There was no one in the front at all. The wheel wasn't moving, but the car was still creeping forward. My first reaction was confusion. I leaned forward, expecting to see someone slumped over, maybe unconscious. But there was no one. Not in the driver's seat, not in the passenger seat, just me. I was alone in a moving car. I froze. My brain couldn't process what was happening. I wanted to believe it was some kind of prank or a malfunction, but the longer I sat there, the more wrong it felt. I should have jumped out. I should have stopped the car. But I just sat there, staring at the empty seat, listening to the rain. The car kept rolling forward, maybe 5 miles an hour, just fast enough that I didn't feel like I could safely jump out. The road started to slope down, and I could see lights ahead through the mist. A village, buildings, a pub sign swinging in the wind, people, warmth, dry. As soon as the car started to slow near the edge of the village, I opened the door and stepped out. I didn't look back. I just walked straight to the pub. My legs were shaking. My shirt clung to my back. I pushed open the door and walked straight to the bar, trying not to draw attention. Inside, it was everything I needed it to be. Dim, warm, with the smell of old wood and peat fire. A few people were sitting around nursing drinks. I found an empty stool, ordered a pint, and sat down. My hands were still shaking. I couldn't make sense of what had happened. About 5 minutes later, the door opened again. 2 men came in, drenched. One of them was tall and broad, the other shorter and wiry. They were soaked through like I was. I noticed mud up to their knees. They looked around the room, then spotted me. The tall one pointed and muttered something to his friend. They made their way over. What they said didn't matter. What happened next explained everything. Apparently, their car had broken down a couple miles out. The battery was dead, but it had just enough juice to light up the dash faintly. Since they were near a hill, they figured they could push it into the village and see if someone there could help jump it or tow it. They'd been outside, pushing the car from the back, when I jumped in. I'd been so focused on getting out of the rain, I hadn't looked carefully. The angle of the road, the dim lights, the weird weather. It all made it look like the car was moving under its own power. They thought I was some lunatic who climbs into a moving car without checking if someone's driving. We laughed about it eventually. I bought them a round as thanks. But for a few minutes, sitting in that back seat, soaked to the skin and staring at an empty driver's seat while the car moved, I truly thought I'd stepped into something unreal. Turns out it was just bad timing, worse weather, and my own brain filling in the blanks. I still think about that night sometimes. How quickly fear can set in. How fast your mind can convince you something impossible is happening when really, it's just a strange set of circumstances. That's what made it scary. Not ghosts, not legends, just being alone, tired, cold, and convinced that reality had bent in front of you. That was the last time I took a back road in Ireland without checking my route twice. I worked as a camp counselor for 3 summers when I was in college, and each one stuck with me in different ways. The second summer, though, was the one I still think about more than I probably should. I didn't go into it expecting anything more than some hot days, a few homesick kids, and maybe a handful of awkward sing-alongs around a fire. But something happened that summer that I've never fully made sense of. It was weird, but not in a fairy tale or ghost kind of way. It was real, and it was unsettling in a way that still gets under my skin. We had this long-standing tradition at the camp. Each counselor was responsible for telling a scary story one night out of the session. The kids lived for it. They spent the day trying to guess who was going to go that night, whispering about who had the scariest story, making up theories about ghosts and killers that had supposedly lived in the woods around the camp. The counselors leaned into it hard. We'd save our best stories for the campfire nights. I had a favorite that I always told, and the kids loved it. It was about a ghost called the Collector. The story went that he'd been a lonely old man who lived in the woods 100 years ago. After he died, he haunted the forest, looking for people to keep him company. But he didn't want just anyone. He only took those who didn't give him what he wanted, 2 teeth, and 2 names of other people he could visit instead. If you didn't give him that, the story went, he'd find you while you were sleeping and take your whole set instead, one by one, slowly, while you couldn't move. It was stupid, just creepy enough to get them going, but not enough to give them nightmares. The twist, though, was what really sold it. At the end of the story, when everyone was staring wide-eyed into the fire, I'd wait for a beat, then pop out my retainer. One of those old-school ones with 2 fake teeth filling in the gaps where my adult teeth had never come in. Then I'd give them this big, toothless grin. Every time, without fail, it scared the hell out of them. Kids would scream, a few would run, and even the ones who tried to act brave usually ended up lying awake that night. I did that story maybe 6 or 7 times over the course of the summer. The first time was in early June. The last time was in August, just a few days before the session ended. It was that last time that changed everything. The kids had been a little more on edge than usual that week. One of the younger ones had gone home early after getting spooked one night walking to the bathroom. He'd said he saw someone crouching behind a tree, but when the counselor went to check, no one was there. We wrote it off as nerves. That kind of thing wasn't unusual. But then another kid, a quiet 12-year-old from Cabin B, started having night terrors. He'd wake up screaming, saying someone was standing over him. Again, it's summer camp. Kids get freaked out. We talked to his parents, agreed to keep a closer eye on things, and moved on. My night to tell the story came just after dinner. We gathered all the cabins around the fire pit, got the s'mores going, and once it was dark enough, I started in with the story. I made sure to hit all the right beats. The old man, the ghost, the missing teeth, the two names. I watched the kids closely, saw them leaning in, wide-eyed and tense, just like always. Then I got to the end. I told them about the time the collector had come to see me and how I'd been ready, how I had 2 teeth to give him, and 2 names. Then I popped out the retainer and gave them that toothless grin. The reaction was bigger than usual. Some of the kids jumped back, a few screamed, and one of the younger ones started crying. All pretty standard. But as the crowd settled, I noticed something. A kid I didn't recognize was standing at the back. He was maybe 11 or 12. Tall for his age, with a long face and big eyes. Pale, but that wasn't unusual. Some kids didn't tan well, and the forest didn't get a ton of sunlight. But I knew every kid at that camp, especially after an entire summer of sessions. And I hadn't seen him before. He wasn't wearing a camp shirt either, just a plain dark hoodie, which was odd considering it was still warm that night. I stared at him for a second too long. Something about him made the hair on my neck go up. But when I glanced down at my retainer and looked back, he was gone. I figured maybe it was just the shadows. Maybe someone had wandered over from another group, or maybe my eyes had played a trick on me. But still, it sat wrong. That night, I went back to my cabin and lay awake. The other counselors were already asleep. I got up once to pee, walked the trail with my flashlight, and found myself scanning the trees more than usual. I didn't see anything, but I felt watched. The next morning, I asked around. No one else had seen the kid. No one was missing from any of the cabins. I even asked the registration staff if anyone new had come in late, maybe a sibling visiting. Nothing. No one matched that description. I didn't like it. I tried to put it out of my mind, but it stuck there, like something wedged under a fingernail. I started sleeping lighter, waking up more during the night. More of the kids said they were having bad dreams, especially the younger ones. Some said they were hearing someone walking outside the cabins late at night. We checked the grounds, but didn't find anything. Then, 2 nights after my last story, someone stole my retainer. I'd left it in its case on my bunk, just like always. But when I got back from the mess hall that night, it was gone. I tore the cabin apart. The other counselors helped. We looked everywhere. It didn't make sense. No one wanted to wear someone else's retainer. It had no value, and I knew I'd left it there. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat up in bed with a flashlight and a pocket knife I'd brought for hikes. I kept checking the windows. I thought maybe it was a prank, or maybe one of the kids had gotten too scared and decided to mess with me. But nothing happened. Not that night. The next morning, I walked out to the edge of the woods near the lake. There was this spot where the trees thinned out just a little, and you could see the water. That's where I found the case. Open, empty, just sitting on a rock. No one admitted to moving it. I asked the kids. I asked the staff. I even went to the director. He told me it was probably just a prank, and not to worry. I didn't buy it. Not completely. That night, I went back to the same rock. I sat there for almost 2 hours, just waiting. I don't know what for. Maybe some kid would come back and try to finish the prank. Maybe I'd see something that would help it all make sense. Around midnight, I started to hear the trees move. Just a little, a rustle here and there, then a crack of a twig. I stood up, flashlight in hand, and turned toward the sound. Nothing. Then I saw something on the ground. A small pile of dirt like someone had dug a shallow hole. Right in the middle was a tooth. A real one. Not one of the fakes from my retainer. A real human tooth. I didn't touch it. I just backed away and walked straight to the director's cabin. The police came the next day. They said it was probably just a lost baby tooth. Some kid buried it as a joke, or maybe didn't want to lose it. But the shape of it didn't look like a baby tooth. It looked more like a molar. An adult one. There was no root. That was the last day of camp. I packed up and left before the kids did. I didn't go back the next summer. I didn't apply. I didn't even respond to the emails. I still think about that kid I saw at the campfire. The one I didn't recognize. I've run through the list of campers from that session over and over again. I've looked at photos. No one matches. I don't know who he was. Sometimes I wonder if someone saw my story, heard it, and decided to use it, to make it real. Not in the supernatural way, but in the real world way. The way people can get ideas in their heads and run with them. A few years later, I had 2 implants put in where those teeth were missing. They're permanent now, but I still keep the old retainer in a drawer, just in case. Not because I think the collector is real, but because someone might be, and they already took the first 2 teeth. I never used to be someone who got nervous about being alone in the woods. I grew up camping with my dad, hiking trails that stretched for miles, and setting up tents in places where you could walk for days and not hear another human voice. I always found peace in that silence. It was the kind of quiet that let your thoughts slow down and settle, not the kind that made you feel watched or uneasy. At least that's how it used to feel. This trip was supposed to be a break. I had been working nonstop for months, long days staring at screens, barely stepping outside except to grab coffee or groceries. I wanted to be disconnected for a while. No phones, no messages, no one knowing where I was. I picked a state forest in a part of the country I'd never been to, drove 6 hours straight, and parked at a nearly empty trailhead just before noon. There were 2 cars in the lot, probably people already deep into their hikes, and the air was thick with late summer humidity. I had packed light but thoroughly. A 1-person tent, enough food for 4 days, water filter, map, compass, and a solar charger just in case. I wasn't planning to rely on GPS, but I had it as a backup. I checked everything twice before locking my car and starting the trail. It was supposed to be about 12 miles to the spot I'd marked as my base, a small clearing near a creek, slightly off-trail, where the forest opened up enough for a decent campsite. The hike started off easy. The trail was clear and dry, and the trees filtered the sunlight so everything had that greenish glow. I didn't see anyone else, which didn't bother me. I'd done dozens of solo trips before. In fact, I preferred them. I made good time and reached the spot by late afternoon. The clearing looked just like it did on the satellite image. Big enough for a tent, surrounded by tall trees, with the creek running about 20 yards away. I unpacked and set up camp. The tent went up easy, and I boiled water for a quick freeze-dried meal. By sunset, I was sitting against a log, watching the last light fade through the trees and listening to the soft gurgle of the creek. It wasn't until sometime after dark that I heard something weird. I wasn't scared at first. I've heard all kinds of things in the woods. Raccoons, deer, even the occasional bear crashing through brush. But this wasn't that. It was footsteps. Not the rapid, 4-legged scrambling of an animal, but slow, deliberate steps, like someone walking carefully. I killed my little camp lantern and sat still. The steps came from deeper in the woods, behind my tent. They weren't close, but they were steady. Step, pause, step, pause. I waited, heart picking up speed, trying to guess if it was just some large animal moving oddly. But the sound kept coming, then stopped. Just like that. No retreating steps, no crash, just gone. I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound made my ears perk up. I kept the knife I used for food prep in my hand inside the sleeping bag, even though I knew it wouldn't do much. At some point, I must have drifted off, because I woke up just before dawn, damp with sweat and stiff from tension. I got up early, made coffee, and tried to shake it off. Maybe it had been nothing. Maybe I had just spooked myself. I hiked around the area a bit to get my mind off it. There were no trails right by the clearing, but I found some deer tracks and what looked like old fire rings, probably from previous campers. I didn't see anything that made me nervous. Day 2 passed quietly. I fished a little in the creek, read some of the book I brought, and napped in my hammock. When night came, I ate early and made sure the area was clean. No trash, no food smells. I even strung up my food bag in a tree, even though I hadn't seen any signs of bears. That night, I heard the steps again. Same pattern. Slow, measured, deliberate. Only this time, they started earlier, before I had even zipped into my tent. I put out my fire, crouched low, and waited. The sound came from the same direction, then stopped again. This time, I stayed outside the tent until almost midnight, flashlight in hand, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Finally, I crawled into the tent, but I didn't sleep. Morning came cloudy and still. The woods felt heavier. I walked around the clearing again, and this time I noticed something. Near the edge of the trees, maybe 50 feet from my tent, a broken branch. Not a big one, just one of those thin, green ones that snap clean. It was freshly broken, still green inside, not dried out. I stared at it a long time. I wasn't sure what I was trying to decide. I told myself I'd give it one more night. I don't know why. Maybe pride. Maybe stupidity. I didn't want to pack up early and feel like I'd let myself get chased off. So I stayed. I made another dinner, cleaned up again, double-checked everything. The steps came back just after dark. This time they didn't stop. They circled. It started from the same place, behind the tent. But then they moved, still slow, still careful, around to the right side of the clearing. Then behind me near the creek. Then to the left. They made a full circle. I didn't breathe. I just crouched low near the fire ring, listening so hard my ears rang. Whoever or whatever it was didn't make a sound beyond those steps. No breathing, no sniffing, no snapping of twigs, just steps on leaves. They were close enough that I should have seen something, but I saw nothing. Then silence. I waited another hour, then another. I didn't move. My legs cramped up. I felt the fear in my stomach like a knot. At some point, I made myself crawl into the tent. I left the knife in my hand again. I don't think I slept more than a few minutes. I kept hearing phantom sounds, twigs cracking, leaves shifting, but nothing that matched the clear steps from before. Just before sunrise, I heard one more thing. Faint click, metal on metal, like a latch. When I got out of the tent, I looked around the site. Nothing was missing. Everything was where I left it. But then I checked the trail that led away from the clearing, the one I'd planned to use to hike out the next day. There were footprints, human ones, just one set, coming in from the woods, crossing the trail, and then turning back. I packed everything in less than 10 minutes. I didn't even make coffee. I hiked out faster than I thought possible, barely stopping to drink water. I didn't calm down until I saw my car. When I got to it, I stopped cold. There was a scratch across the driver's side window, a deep one, from edge to edge, like someone had dragged something sharp across it. There was no other damage. The doors were still locked, but the scratch hadn't been there when I left. I drove straight home, no stops. I didn't even eat until I got back to my apartment that night. I locked every door and checked every window. I told myself maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe someone else had been hiking out there and messed with the wrong car. Maybe the footsteps were nothing. But I haven't been camping alone since, and I still don't know what I heard out there, or who was walking in circles around my tent, or what they wanted. But I know they were real, and they weren't lost. They knew exactly where I was. They knew where I slept, and they didn't want to be seen.